Hello, welcome back to the podcast. Today I sat down with my friend Kristina, amazing human being with such a big heart. Hope this episode is an inspiration for you and you take something valuable away. Enjoy.
All right, Kristina, I am so excited to have you on my show. Kristina is such a good friend to me, and I've met her on the interweb, but we became such a close friends. And yeah, thanks for coming on the show. Please give us a 30-second quick intro.
Thank you. Yes, I am so happy to be here, and a little bit about my background. So I am an occupational therapist by background with both my bachelor's and master's degrees in OT. And I am a mental wellness and trauma recovery coach in my spare time, as well as a podcast host. And then I have a traditional 9 to 5 as well.
Yay! So much to talk about. So I like to take people back to where they kind of like earlier in life. So what were you like growing up as a kid? And just tell us a little bit about your childhood and how you navigated your teenage and all that.
Okay. Yeah. As a little kid, my parents got divorced when I was 3. And so I feel like there was a lot of shuttling back and forth, like between the time that I would spend with my mom or with my dad. And I didn't have siblings until I was almost 8. So now I have 4 siblings, but for 8 years, it was just me. So I feel like I was really independent. I was really creative. I spent a lot of time on my own, coloring, drawing, making up plays or dances or, all sorts of different things. So I feel like there was maybe more significant creative space for me back then. And I don't feel like I get to tap into that. And I don't believe that I'm as creative now, but that's kind of spinning now in my head as I'm sharing this. And then when I got a little bit older, so probably around the time of 8 or 9, I started getting more involved in gymnastics. And so did gymnastics and cheerleading pretty extensively from middle school and high school. And then I ended up cheering in college as well. So I feel like always kind of dynamic. Like I was never somebody who sat still or never a kid who went home and just like did homework after school and nothing else. So I think this multi-passionate, thread kind of carried throughout my life.
Yeah. So one thing that I find it in common with a lot of people that I meet through this platform is that when we were growing up, like including myself, I've always felt like there was something wrong with me. And because I think it was also like external validation that we like now still overcoming, but it's just like culturally, it wasn't very accepting or like diverse in a way that there was like a certain path to success that everyone had to follow. Otherwise, like, you don't get recognized as a successful person. So there was a lot of judgment around that. And I think a lot of the multi-passions that I meet, they have been kind of cooped up in that mindset. And like, they wanted to unleash this thing. Like we have been like cooking up inside of us so long. And then there is like a one moment or whatever, a series of moments that get us to realize like it doesn't really matter. And then I need to do my thing. Was there any like breakthrough moments where you kind of unleash your power and like do your thing?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know that I ever felt so trapped by it as a kid or labeled or anything like that. But I know when I went into OT school, I had a lot of different interests and everything. And when I first started practicing as an occupational therapist, I loved my job. I was very much a traditional OT working in a hospital and loved it. And my husband at the time was military. And so I had to leave my job and I, transferred to the military base and started working in a role still as a traditional OT. But then I started looking at other opportunities. And early in my career, I started taking this very non-traditional path, which for a lot of OTs, and I even used to say this myself, like had I stayed at the hospital where I first started, I loved the work. I never would have even realized that there were other opportunities out there for me. So then when I got this opportunity to stand up a clinic on the military base, that was so cool. And it was so unheard of, especially for somebody very young, and early in their career. And that just opened a whole other portal and allowed me, this like snowball effect, right? To do something that was so unheard of, really, within the role of an occupational therapist. And then I will say the second time of having that kind of awakening or permission maybe came, I've always like dabbled with stuff. I've always been interested in just a lot of different things. I will say, just to backtrack a little bit, to particularly earlier in my career, I kind of hopped, jobs. And I remember hearing from my parents, like, you can't do that. You need to settle down. You need to stay in a single job and you're going to retire there. And, my one position I was in for 8 years. And so I finally felt like, okay, I've got this under control. Like, I can do this. I can commit to something. But I've just always had these interests, and people are like, don't you ever just go home and sit down? Or like, why are you so busy all the time? And really question that. And I did human design and found out that I was a manifesting generator. And in that, they say that is our personality, is we like to dabble in things. We like to play with things. We like to explore, and we like to do things. And I think the biggest piece of permission with that was, you don't have to do it to completion. Like, you can get into it, you can try it. And if you don't like it, it's okay to walk away, and I think that was really such a gift for me to come across that, because it made me feel validated in many ways.
I have so many to talk about that, because I also, going back to, okay, there are so many. So first thing I thought about was when I had my first job out of college. I got a really great job, and my parents, my family was kind of poor, and I was supporting financially. And after like a year or so went by, and I was in South Korea, and I've never been to the States before, and I wanted to come here, and I wanted to experience the culture, because I self-taught my English, and I wanted to experience that. So when I brought up that idea that I wanted to move here for this like a hotel contract that I got with Marriott, and it should have been like oh yeah, that's great, that's amazing, but where like my mom was like, why would you want to give up on this great job where it will give you the lifetime of safety or whatever? I'm like, I don't think so. They might give me a lifetime of safety, but I won't grow. And that's literally killing me. And I can see that I can advance myself so much faster and so much better if I take this adventure. And so there was some like, back and forth. And then eventually my family was supportive, and then like, sent me, and rest is history.
Yeah.
But another thing is, we always have a feeling like when we start, we have to finish. So when I was interested, I'm an event planner currently, like as many other things, but when I was like a 19 or so, I wanted to be an event planner just out of blue. Like, I was like, oh, what would it be like hosting this kind of big, gigantic conference, events, things like that. And I was kind of like, queen of self-studying. So I went through all the books, and I, took little classes, online classes, all by myself. But it didn't really progress anything, because I was in the hospitality industry at that time. It did kind of work as I was planning small little client events, but it wasn't like the one that I was envisioning, which I am doing right now. So when I look back, none of the activity that I did went waste. Like, all comes back. That's the beauty of it. Like, when you realize that all this activity, I might not finish it now, but it has a reason. And I don't know what, but I have to trust it, because it all comes back.
I love that. Yeah, I can see that in so much of the work that I've done too. Even, what's fascinating is I worked in pediatrics for a while, and I think that would be so hard really to translate in a lot of ways. But even in the grand scheme of things, and I'm not a parent, but it still taught me a lot of patience. It taught me how to really interact with other people, especially when they're not acting in a way that I want them to, but yeah, I think all of our skills whether we see it through or not, they're building blocks along the way.
Mm-hmm. So tell us, what are some of the random things that you
Mm-hmm.
did, like all the things that you tapped on?
Yeah, I will definitely go into that. I do want to say too, I think a big limiting belief maybe too, or limiting message is that it resonated with me that you were just sharing, was this idea of safety. And for me, that is one of my core values, is like safety and security. And so I think that I always question that when I want to kind of jump off the deep end and go try something new, is how safe and secure will it be for me? And I think that's one of the things that holds a lot of entrepreneurs back. And yet I have reminded myself time and again that even if you have a corporate job, it is not safe and secure. Like, they can let you go in a heartbeat. Like, yeah, you might have a 401k that you're investing in. Yeah, you might have a salary today, but they can just as easily let you go tomorrow. No longer are there pensions. There aren't those same places, I guess, companies where people stay the duration of their career. And I think understanding that it's really up to us to create our own safety and stability. And that's how I remind myself too, that by doing this multi-passionate work and really diving in and seeing what excites me and seeing what I can leverage, that in the long run is going to create that safety net for me.
And the things are going more towards that direction, because the people won't stay in the company that long unless there is like learning and growth opportunity. But even then, you're kind of within the same culture. So there is a limitation of how much you can grow. And human tendency is kind of like, we get comfortable and then we kind of get stuck. Our belief system kind of like forms it around what we know. And so changing the scenery, changing the company definitely helped me to have a different work quality, even have a different mindset and have different deliveries.
Sure. Well, there's so much growth that comes from a change in perspective. And I think of that with mentors too, right? Is like, you wouldn't want to stay with the same mentor for 20 years. Like, you want to experience new people because you want to experience new perspectives, because that opens up a whole other world. So yeah.
I love that. Do you have mentor?
I currently do not, but one of my projects that I dabbled in was my current company allowed me to put together a mentorship program, because we did not have one at our company. So I did a pilot program from February through May and just got a big award for it within our company, which was amazing, and have proposed it to hopefully expand it. So we started with a very small group within our organization, and it was 16 people. And so our goal is to expand it to 100 and hopefully prove the same efficacy and benefits for that program, and then go company-wide from there.
Love that. So as a multi-passionate, I always get pulled into side projects, like something that is not related to my main job. Do you also get pulled into many things, or you volunteer a lot?
Oh, I volunteer. Yeah. I mean, that was totally me. I was just like, I reached out and I said, is there a mentor? Is there someone that I can pair up with to mentor? And they're like, no, that doesn't exist here. And I'm like, okay, can I create it then?
Yeah.
So I think it's more that I volunteer. I know, like, my project load right now is really light, and I keep harassing my boss and my director. And I'm like, guys, I have bandwidth. Please give me more work, But yeah, so to go back to your other question though, just what my kind of trajectory has looked like, I'll just start from my career. But so my first job was at a hospital as an OT. And that was a really great learning experience, because they started us on like the easiest floor, and they trained us on that floor. And then we rotated to greater level of difficulty, greater challenge in terms of the patients and the population we were working with. And eventually moved, so like orthopedics and rehab were kind of at the front end, and then moved through ICU. And so then you're, working around tubes and wires and needles and, all of that stuff to try to work with a patient. And then I landed in love neurology. So I started working really closely with a lot of our head injury patients. and really enjoyed that. And then also had stroke patients as well. Then after leaving that hospital, I went and worked in pediatrics. So I was at a pediatric clinic, and then I also picked up work at the schools in the area. So I got that pediatric experience. That's the reason I went into OT, because I thought I wanted to work in peds. And my dream was to get to St. Jude and work at that hospital. And within a year of working with kids, I decided that was not where I wanted to work. And so then I had this opportunity come up at Fort Hood to stand up it was the OT portion of their brain injury clinic. So I got to go in, they let me plan blueprints for my entire facility. I got to plan everything out, order all the equipment, set it up exactly as I wanted it. And that was
Don't we
really
love those?
It was so cool. And then they're like, you're not spending enough money. You need to spend more money. So I'm getting motorcycle simulators, and I built out a whole apartment for our patients. And it was so cool. And I never actually got to see it come to fruition to move into that space, which was really sad. And then while I was working at that job, I picked up side work during that time as well and worked in nursing homes, which I really enjoyed. And then, I left Fort Hood and was offered a position at the Tampa VA as an OT. And the official offer hadn't come in yet, but just with timing, our lease was up and there were just a lot of things that were kind of coming to an end. And it was it makes enough sense for us to just go ahead and relocate now from Texas down to Florida. So I took a travel position down there in the meantime. And then that position at the VA went on a hiring freeze. And so I never actually got into that position. So I did civilian work then again for about a year and decided civilian work was not where I wanted to be either. And I was offered an opportunity to go into a program that was congressionally mandated for traumatic brain injury for all branches of the military and the VA. So with my clinical background, it was nice because I wasn't working clinically anymore, hands-on with patients, but I was working with teams who we developed all of the clinical practice guidelines for all branches of the military for how they would manage and treat head injuries. And then we had a research branch. And so I got to get involved in research and do some research studies. And then we had a clinical arm. And that wasn't so much then that I was doing the clinical piece, but I was actually helping to facilitate and build out what our big conferences would look like, what topics we would speak on, what our sessions would be titled. And then I also had a chance to go around and audit some of our programs around the country and make sure that they were, that they had the resources that they needed and that they were meeting our expectations. So that was a really fun job. And then within that job, I transitioned a little bit heavier into research and had a project that became my baby, and it was called the Smart Home Project. And we adapted homes for veterans. And initially we had done a facility where it was a transition space for veterans who weren't quite ready to go home on their own, but they needed, a little bit of extra care and time. And within that facility, this was early 2010. So, iPhones had just come out, but smart homes were not really a thing yet, Yeah. And so we had these tags that we would hang on them. I mean, they were aware of it, but they would wear this tag and we would be able to see where they were in the building. And so it wasn't a video, but it was GPS, how you can see the map or the dots. Mm-hmm. And so if they didn't go to an appointment that they were supposed to be at, we could send them messages, and we had these panels. And again, this was pre-iPad. So we had these panels up on the wall and it would track their movements. And so if they were walking through the halls, it would say, Johnny, you have an appointment in room 32B, and it would kind of follow his movements, or it's time for you to take your medication, go to the nurse's station. So that was really cool. And then we moved into family homes with some of the most severely injured. And so a lot of these men and women were bedbound, and it was either their spouse or their mom in most cases that was caring for them then at that point in time. And so the goal was to alleviate as much of the stress and burden on the caregiver. So whatever that looked like, for some of them, it was like automatic doors because the veteran was in a power chair. And so it would just make it so that the caregiver didn't have to go around and like try to hold the door open while trying to power the chair through the door, just little things like that. And I loved spending the time with them. It was such a fun role to have. And then I was kind of forced to leave that work because of my marriage ending and that situation. And so I moved back home to Colorado and picked up OT clinical work a little bit and still was like, no, that's not where I want to be. Went into medical device sales for a couple years and decided I really missed the military work. So now I'm a project manager for mobile apps for the VA. So managing dev teams and some of the other clinical programs that we do, and love it. Absolutely love it.
Wow. I can see kind of like correlation of everything that you've done. There's like a lot of different diversity of work, but there's like a common theme that I can notice is like you have such a big heart that you want to solve a problem that helps somebody. I feel like a lot of multi-passionate, we're problem solver. We love solving problem. When someone's stuck in this like a thought pattern, we want to get in there and then kind of solve with them. And that's my tendency, at least. And I feel like what you've done so far, just by do all those things like very briefly, I can see like you always kind of fell in love with the solving problem and changing the dynamic that had been used before. You create new pattern, and all those intention goes towards to help others. So I can see that now still playing out in your current life even more. Do you see that it adds up for you, like your experience? You might not have intended it that way, and obviously there was life happened too. So you didn't plan it in certain ways, but it kind of like adding up in a way that like leads you to where you are now.
Yeah, I think sometimes I see the connection and then sometimes I feel very disconnected, if that makes sense. With my current role, I will say I for a long time kept I know it was manifested, but I kept saying I was going to move from healthcare into the tech industry. And that was a really important transition for me. I felt like the work I could do in tech would touch more people than I would be able to as I was working as a therapist, just one-on-one. And granted, not to undermine that therapy work and that individual time with somebody and the ultimate impact on their life. But I think oddly enough, and I don't know why I'm saying that's odd, but making an impact and like really making a difference for people in their lives is really important to me. And, I know that's really the underlying theme in my personal work now too.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that, because when I got into event planning, I got into logistical planning. And then that means I can plan those big thousands of people conferences, but it could mean sales event where they kind of treat salespeople in like, booze and food and whatever nice luxury activities. And when I did that, like for a little bit, I kind of realized I don't support any of these. I don't want to work for, I want my effort to go towards helping somebody and doing something that is impactful and that I can get behind. So I was kind of like pivoting in the way that to find those niche. And I feel like I kind of like shifted that way. So I can totally relate to whatever we are doing. We don't want to just do just because we can, but we want to do something that can help others. And that matters. I feel like that has emotional impact.
Yeah. I wonder, have you, just from what you're saying, and then from my own experience too, do you find with multi-passionates that money is not enough? I guess like the way that I was thinking about it or relating your story to my story is it wasn't just about the money. Like,
That's
because
right.
I mean, the reason I'm doing all of these things is not just for the money. I mean, in some ways it is because I know the more money I make, the greater impact I can make. Right.
Yes. Yes.
But at the same time, what drives me is the impact, less so than the money. Like if I were just making a ton of money, but it wasn't fulfilling work, that would not fill me up. It would not be enough for me, if that makes sense.
I totally get that. And I feel like, yes. And I want to be able to, I'm kind of getting to that shifting mindset also. Like I want to get well compensated for my work,
Absolutely.
right? Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, whenever I kind of commit to something because it was very good cause, but then it gives me like very little dollar for me to survive, that still is not going to work for me. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not going to, I mean, same, right? Like I'm not going to work for free. And on the flip side, there has to be more to it than just money.
Right. Right. I wouldn't put the money to be the main reason why I took this job or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So have you always like loved learning, like learning new things?
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
Those are all, with the exception, I think, of one, those are all like self-help professional development books.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
you know, I have so many more on Audible and on Kindle and
Yeah. Yeah. So I know like I loved learning because I was always kind of learning and I loved I fell in love with books because then I got to learn something about how to get out of the debt, how to make my like investment worth it. Because no one told us or teach us at school, especially when we're in the middle school or high school. I never learned that. And I never thrived in that academic world. But when I got into like the college and real world and starting internship, I was like thriving. And I realized, okay, I'm good at like real life stuff. I'm not good at like academic world. I can read a thing. But then like I also realized I actually whenever I first found out about the Audible thing, I am much better listening and I can comprehend it much better than reading. I can read it too long. It always like puts me to sleep.
Yeah.
And so the key that I found from my experience is that I learned how to learn in the way that I learned. So whenever I want to learn something, I use that tactic. Like I know how I learn. So I wouldn't force myself to read like 30 pages of a thing to learn something. I would find a way where I can watch a video or listening to the audiobook and things like that. So I kind of found out how I work and that was life changing. Do you have like one of those moments?
Yeah, it's actually something that we are taught and teach in OT school and as a therapist, because especially working with kids, but with any patients, is just understanding that everybody learns differently. And so really adapting and modifying so that we can make sure that they retain the information. Or, you know, when working in the school system, it was a matter of understanding what that unique child's needs were and how they learned best. And not just the like auditory, kinesthetic, or visual, you know, but also, you know, do they need a certain kind of chair? Like I'm sitting on a ball, right? There were so many times that we would put kids on balls, you know, because it allows them to get that movement and that stimulation so that then their brain can focus on what it's supposed to focus on. So I feel really fortunate in my education from being able to understand that. And that also branched into the brain injury recovery and rehab as well.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That is huge. Yeah. So with your experience and how you got into all the new kind of territories in your journey, if you were to give someone a recommendation or suggestion, if someone is on the fence, like they're like kind of scared and they don't want to take the leap, or they're, I don't know, unsure about, we briefly talked about like having the safety.
Yeah.
Do you have anything that you want to add?
I guess what I leaned on the most was I can always try it. And if I fail or if I hate it, I can always go back, and from the standpoint of being a healthcare provider, they're always going to need a therapist. It might not be my ideal job at the moment, or it might not be the right pay or the right hours or whatever the situation, but I will never not have a job. So I might as well take the risk and take the chance while I can and see what comes of it, because I may not get this opportunity again.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. How do you find joy these days?
It's an interesting question and thought, because I think I've been playing with this a lot lately, but it's more about noticing and observing the things that bring me joy in the moment. So rather than going out and seeking joy, it's like, ooh, this feels really good, or like, I'll notice I get really childlike and silly and playful when I feel a sense of kind of the walls come down a little bit, and really feel safe, secure, but have that freedom to have fun, right?
Yeah.
And so it's almost more of a reflection after the fact. And I'm like, oh, that was really juicy. That was really good. Like, that brought me a lot of joy. Can I share one more tip?
Yes. Yes.
There's a woman named Catherine Price, and she came out with this book recently, and I'm going to blank on the title, but it's all about fun. And it's really talking about how we as adults don't engage in fun, and we're missing so much of that in our lives. And she calls it a funtervention. So like a fun intervention. But another thing I heard her speak about was this idea of delight. And I've shared this a few times now on Instagram, and I'm thinking about starting a challenge for a month just so that other people can experience it. But it's again, kind of that concept of not going searching for it, but when you see something that gives you that sense of delight, you literally in your head or aloud go, delight.
Yeah.
And it's so fun. And so I just noticed myself doing that. And I take my dog on walks at sunset now because I love the sunset. And every single night, the sky looks a little bit different. The colors are a little bit different. The sun is positioned just so. Or we'll have like a really good rainstorm and there's rainbows. But the other night I was out and there were some really pretty flowers, and it was just that, golden hour sun, and it was hitting them so perfectly. I walk by these flowers every single day, but it was that night, they just looked so stunning that I had to stop and take a picture. And I shared in my stories, I said, delight, like this was my delight.
I love that.
Yeah.
Are you going to start that challenge?
I really want to. I'm thinking about doing it for August. Yeah.
Yes. And then tag everyone.
Yeah.
So we can get started. That is so powerful because like you and I talked about us as an adults not having so much of childlike fun, and we are so into our world day to day, and sometimes we forget to have fun, and it's so important, like vital part of our life, but also just realizing what brings us joy. And it's not so much about what it is. It's about like being in the moment and recognizing, being that's just aware of what's going on, what we have in the present moment, and being content. That actually brings us so much joy without having to do anything. And I was reading this book, like many different books on like law of attraction and self-development, self-care, and all those things. And I got to the point where I was so grateful for even like beyond like this, whoever made this glass, like beyond all these things to happen, where this blanket pillow had come from. Like, so I was kind of getting to that point. And then at first I felt really weird. Like, why do I think that way? Like, but after I kind of start building that habit, it's like, it became really easy practice. Like, I am so grateful for everything. I'm so grateful for all these things that I get to enjoy in a daily basis. And I feel like those keep grows. Like, I feel so fortunate.
Yeah. I love that.
So definitely tag me when you start that challenge.
I will. And I don't want people to feel pressured, but it's just,
No,
that
I mean,
hopefully it stirs within people just that recognition that there's something good and juicy in every day. Like every day may not be great, but there's something that you can hold on to.
it also speaks to like right now too, like we just went through the pandemic. We realize a different type of life now, and we realize different way to interact with people, a different way to live. And I feel like the Moment of Delight challenge is a good, like really good addition, what we need. Because let's say like we were all virtual, I was working, and like we don't actually meet with my coworker or whatnot. So I actually don't get to build up that relationship. I'm missing that part, like missing that piece of like building the human connection. And so bringing that human emotion, like understanding our delight moment. And I feel like that's a really great start.
Yeah, I like it.
Awesome. So I have only one question left for us, but tell us where people can find you and any exciting project that you have going on you want to share.
Yeah. So I have 2 places on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. And so my personal business page is rise_with_Kristina. And then my podcast is the Rise Up Thriving podcast. And so that handle is Rise Up Thriving. And I am in the process of building out modules. So my goal is to create modules and hopefully eventually a platform of low cost or no cost mental wellness resources. So I'm in the process of doing that. I have a program coming up that I am launching and beta testing that's called Becoming Enough. And it's really focusing on the feelings of not good enough and how we can move from those feelings that hold us back into feeling more than enough.
I love that. Those are so important. Do you want to tell us about your podcast, what people can find from your podcast?
Yeah. So my podcast is focused on women, and it is the kind of tagline is stories of hope, healing, and resilience. And the purpose of the podcast is for women to come on and share stories of overcoming adversity to provide hope for other women that may be struggling.
That's amazing. And thank you for creating that platform, people to be able to speak up. And I was on her show once.
You were.
And it was such a vulnerable story of mine. But when I said it, after that, it actually wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, it is still big of a deal, but I broke that kind of like the self-positioning of this is something that is holding me back or anything like that. And then I could, be free from it. You guys go ahead and check it out. So my final question for you is, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Really, I mean, and maybe because I just said that about the course, but like really just affirming and validating who I was when I was younger and telling my younger self that I'm enough just as I am. And, I think just giving that message, because I think otherwise we're always grasping and seeking and seeking external validation and grasping at that worthiness from outside of ourselves. And I think understanding that I don't need to do and work and prove myself in order to earn love or in order to earn worthiness, but I can do and get my hands in all of these things because they bring me joy, rather than needing it from that external source.
That is so powerful. If somebody were to listen to this right now and they never actually got to hear it that way, like you don't actually have to be something special to be loved. Like that is like just really powerful statement. And thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
This was so much fun, and I cannot wait to hear more about all your fun and exciting journey that you have planning. And thank you so much for being the inspiration for us and creating this platform, creating this like conversations, creating these challenges, creating this opportunity for others to step in and step up their game and also heal themselves and experience the joy out of their lives. So thank you for being part of that. And I so adore you.
I adore you. Thank you. And I'm so glad I get to support you on your platform. It's amazing.
Thank you.
That wraps up this episode, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If this story served you in any way, I'd love for you to leave your review on this podcast. Don't forget to connect with me on my Instagram, Multipassionate Genius. And if you have a story to share, I would love to feature you here. So send me a message on my Instagram. Lastly, no matter what, I believe in you and I'm rooting for you. So go out there and create the life you want.